Hello guys, so today's podcast is all about school because it's such a massive part of any child's life. We talked about the fact that quite often one of the big reasons that parents end up getting in touch with us is because things start around problems with school and then escalate. We talked about talking about school. You know, should we try and get children to talk to us about school? Should we force the issue? We spoke about the fact that school in its current setup, in many ways, doesn't work for all children and where there might be problems. We spoke about why some children might struggle, why there may be issues for some children more than others. We spoke about the impact of COVID. We spoke about how schools can help, how they can work, in partnership with parents to help with this issue. As ever, loads of different things. We spoke about loads of different things. It is a conversation, so we do go off in quite a few different areas. A couple of things to point out, that Helen's mic on this one, it sounds a bit rubbish because we actually recorded this one. This was the second one I think we recorded, and we didn't have a decent mic for Helen yet. So it sounds a bit like she's either a pilot or underwater or something like that. But hopefully we've done enough of a good job on it that it doesn't sound too bad. Also, at some point, listening back, it did sound, Helen raises this actually, but it sounds a little bit like we're down on schools overall. And we're really not. We know how much pressure schools are under. We know how hard teachers and all school staff work. I guess our talking is, we're coming at it more from a frustration that we can't help all children in the way that maybe we need to. But we do talk about that later on as well. We address that. Anyway, I think that's about it. Right, hope you enjoy it. Hello and welcome to another of the Capa podcasts. And this week we're going to be talking about school and education and Capa. So it might seem unrelated because obviously Capa is normally something that we think about happening at home, in a family setting. But I think personally it's always really useful to look at it in terms of everything that's going on around it in a child's life, everything that's happening that could be contributing.
That is so important, that understanding the young person's life in the round, isn't it? That there's we need to understand what's going on in every part of their life to really be able to move things forward.
Everything has a knock-on effect on everything else. It's all systemic. Everything affects everything else. So, I guess a starting point would be to think about how can difficulties at school contribute or be linked to Capa?
I was just thinking about, we do talk a lot about we look at what the behaviour is, but why it happens. And for lots of families and for lots of young people and children, the whys is laying at school. Working not that long ago, talking to a parent whose child just really, at year 7, they started to be bullied. And that was the catalyst for a change in the behaviour. Yeah. Really struggling to make friendships in year 7. Really struggling. It's a big adjustment, isn't it, from primary school up to secondary school?
I say this to parents all the time, but it's secondary school. School in general, but particularly secondary school, is tough for any child, really.
And I'm struck always by, we talk always about keeping communication open with your children and talking to them about their school day, but it's really quite unusual, I think, for your average child perhaps to talk very openly about what's going on at school, whether that's what's going on in a lesson or who's talking to them or not. Maybe that's just my experience, I don't know, but I'd be interested to know, Jane, what you've found, whether yours are happy to talk about what's going on in school, or is this something that we're asking kids to do that they're not really able to do?
You know what? And I kind of, I come from that school of thought where I sort of try not to ask and bombard my children with lots of questions, even though it's really difficult. Because what you want to hear, what you want to talk to your kids about when they come home from school, how was it? How did you get on? How were things? And I actually find with my two children that it's the last thing they want to talk about. And certainly that's what parents say to me. I can't get anything out of what's happening with my children at school. They don't tell me anything that's what's happening.
And that can leave parents feeling a real failure, I think, because we make it sound like every other parent is having that conversation and every other child is saying, oh, yes, Mum, it was terrible today. And sometimes kids do, but you have to work quite hard to get it out of them, I think, or you have to be just lucky often.
Yeah, but also I think that idea of working hard to get it out of them, I think that's something that comes up quite a bit. We talk about behaviours escalating and things developing over time. That it can be something like that where you are backing a child essentially into a corner, working hard and almost forcing them, tell me what's going on. And that child backs off more and feels maybe a little more overwhelmed because they don't know how to process it or they're not ready to process it yet.
And there is a level of shame. If you're being bullied at school, there's a level of shame, isn't there, I think, for you. And admitting that even to your parents is quite hard. Massively.
As well, if you think about the what's happening during adolescence as a child starts to, separate, essentially. Find their own way out in the world, separate slightly from the family. And it might be that they don't feel comfortable, perhaps talking to their parents about this that's going on at school as well. That can be an aspect to it.
Can I put myself out on a limb here?
Of course.
And I don't want to get political, but I'm going to throw it out there. I think the school system, in my opinion, is pretty broken for a lot of children and a lot of young people. The school system is very much based on results and how well children achieve academically.
I mean, I don't think you're going out on a limb to suggest this,
I'm not going out on a limb. Oh, good. But, saying the school system is broken, it's like, oh, my goodness. But, for so many children and young people, school is really, really difficult. Whether it's 100%. Going in and sitting. I was talking to a parent who contacted us a couple of weeks ago. And she was saying that the messages she received from her 5-year-old's teacher it was their first parents' evening. And the message from the teacher was, well, he's really struggling, isn't he? He finds it hard to sit down and concentrate. And I'm like,
he's 5 years old.
Yeah.
He's a boy.
And it's sitting down and concentrating. It's I don't think school always serves the purpose for children and young people. And I think some of that behaviour that we see as a result of it is the system is broken and we're trying to fit our children, shoehorn our children into a system that doesn't always work for them. Definitely. And we don't recognise, or we do sort of recognise it doesn't work, but what do we do about it?
We ask them to get on with it.
Yeah,
we basically go, do you know what? Yeah, it's tough, but it's tough for everyone.
Yeah.
Get on with it.
Yeah. I had a conversation with my son the other day. We went for a really lovely walk at the weekend and we were talking about school and he was saying, I really struggle in school. They tell us it's all about the exams. They tell us that, if we work really hard and we get some really good results in our exams, the world will be a much better place for us. And he's like, it's not about that. He's like, I can still achieve what I want to achieve without a piece of paper telling me I can get there or not, because lots of people do it.
Yep.
And it was really hard to say, oh, you got a point there. I couldn't say, well, no, you do need an exam behind you. But
I think what you've highlighted there again as well is that you had that conversation away from the immediate, you come from school, put your bag down, hang your coat up, would you like a drink and a snack? There's a little bit of separation of time there, and you're out walking and you're side by side, and all those things, those three factors make those conversations so much easier to have, don't they?
You're right.
I think that's something important to highlight if people want to have those conversations, to remember those things.
It's that magic thing, isn't it, when we say to parents, the best conversations to have with your children are in the car because you're side by side. The eye contact isn't so intense. It's
Although
not those
as well,
demands.
Though, sometimes, I mean, I've talked with some parents and they've tried to have those conversations in the car, and it's kind of come quite clear that actually, though, there is a pressure in the car that you cannot get away from it. You know, like if you're in a car, if you're having a 25-minute car journey, you can't just go, right, I'm going to go to my room now. Yeah, I'm just going to go to the kitchen, get a drink of water. That's not happening. You know, you're in it. So that is something to bear in mind as well.
It isn't, you just reminded me that, parents that have been in touch with us to say that their child who's tried to escape from a moving car and, thinking about why has a child decided being outside the car, even though it's moving, is better than being inside it and safe? Is it, down to what's happening in the car at the time, or is it just, are they on their way to somewhere they don't want to be? It's pulling apart all those situations, isn't it?
What are the other things that you guys see as being the root of the difficulty within school? What do we need to think about?
What are parents telling you, Matt? You work with a lot of parents in this circumstances as well. What are parents telling you? What are you seeing?
So I think, academic achievement is a really big one. I think sensory overload is a really important thing to keep in mind, because if you think about the school environment, visually it can be very stimulating. In terms of sound, it can be really loud, really chaotic. Think about transitions between lessons. In a secondary school, I don't know when the last time you guys were in a secondary school, but
you need a map for most of them, Matt. Let's face it.
Yeah, exactly. It's just me moving around between sessions, sometimes working in schools, and it's finding my way first of all, and then the ebb and flow of it's like rivers meeting and the currents kind of clashing, and it's so just making your way through that throng of people is hard. And then the sound, and then if you're trying to make sense of different conversations around you, there can be a real feeling of danger for some children in certain schools. We start last podcast we touched on what's going on in the environment. The presence of gangs within some schools, affiliation, that sadly that's real.
That hyper and hypo arousal that children can find themselves in for a huge, 6-7 hours of their day.
Yeah,
where they're kind of on high alert. What can I do? How can I survive this situation? I know survive sounds a big word, but
that's what it feels like.
It does feel like that, doesn't it, for some kids?
Yeah.
What am I looking out for here? Should I answer this question? Should I not? Should I talk to them? Should I give them eye contact? Should I not? Can I go to the toilet? Can I not go to the toilet? Where do I sit? There's so much going on.
And that's beyond the what we see as the reason for them being there, learning academically, which also puts a massive strain on. So I always kind of talk to parents about, thinking about the brain in the two parts. You've got your emotional side of the brain, the thinking part of the brain, and needing a nice balance. You can't feel settled unless you have enough space for the thinking part of your brain to be able to regulate what's going on within you and to make sense of what's going on around. And you think about the pressure that we put on the thinking part of the brain, trying to, all the things that we ask a child to make sense of during a school day. And then as parents, the messages that our children get from us is, well, you've got to be there. You've got to go to school.
So for me, the bit that I think that's really important for us as parents and carers, what we can do is validate the experience. We talked about validation last week, didn't we? The importance of validating. It's not about saying you don't have to go to school necessarily, but it's just validating. I know it must be really tricky.
Yeah, I can see how hard
it must be
this
very
is.
Hard. Yeah. I remember when I was at secondary school, and oh my goodness, I remember going into year 7 and all these kids that were so much bigger than me and trying to navigate around the classroom. And as it got easier in year 8, and then year 9, it was options, and then year 10, it's mocks, and year 11, it's exams.
Oh my God. It's stressing me out just hearing that, by the way.
I know. But
I feel we're already getting onto the whole topic of school refusal as well.
Yeah.
Or we're nudging that way, aren't we? Which is another issue which comes up for many families. So we've got the school connection, but we're now talking about what's going on outside of school, if you like. Or, well, because the two are connected, aren't they?
Yeah.
What's going on inside school will impact a child's behaviour at home, but also their decision about whether they're going to carry on going to school. And what's going on at home may well also. I was thinking as well when you were saying, Matt, about regulation. If you're not emotionally regulated, you're not in a position to learn. And some children are going in really stressed already because of what they've had to do before they've got to school.
Just creates a negative cycle, doesn't it?
Yeah, so already aren't in a position to learn. So it goes kind of both ways, doesn't it? And then you've got a child who's refusing to go to school, and then that's stressing things at home, and the school is on your back then, and that just complicates the whole emotional structure and environment at home, doesn't it? And who's getting cross with who, and who's getting angry, and who's shouting and pushing and not getting out of bed.
So can I ask a question? What's the impact of COVID? We talk much more about young people's anxiety and social phobia and the impact of COVID. Do you think COVID has had a big impact on schooling, or was it there before COVID?
I think COVID undoubtedly has had a massive impact on children and how they feel around school. Obviously, the change from the fact of having to, that absolutely unshakable routine of going to school Monday to Friday. All of a sudden, right, that's not happening anymore.
Yeah.
Homeschooling, learning to learn in a different way. Learning from home. All of a sudden, your mum or your dad or your primary caregiver is also sort of your teacher.
Yeah.
Somehow. Obviously, talking to parents, how difficult that was for them. The stories of the levels of tension and stress trying to get your child to learn. But also that stress is going to impact on the child. So that's from one angle, looking at that initial change. Any disruption to such a major part of a child's life is going to have a destabilizing effect on
I was
them.
talking to a parent recently, Matt. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but just what came into my head. You've got different ages of children that have been impacted. So you've got children now that are going into reception that were 2 during COVID. So that socialization was impacted.
Really
You've
important
got the children that missed out now in year 9 or 10 that actually missed out on the end of year 6, beginning of year 7. You've got, every year for every child, there was some kind of impact of missing education. And for some young people, parents have told us that, actually their child thrived not being in the classroom.
Yeah.
They loved home learning. They were really self-learning, able to, manage their learning in a classroom where they weren't before.
There's been a lot of research already, hasn't there, about the emotional impact. About some children have got used to not being in school, and that's worked for some families. That some families were talking about actually the aggression and the difficult behaviour was much less when they were at home because the children weren't having to face that stress of going into school.
Yeah, and if you think back to what we were talking about just a little earlier about perhaps sensory overload, and you think for a child that finds the environment of being in school really overwhelming, the amount of noise, the amount of social interaction, the amount of visual stimulation, everything, if you can take that away, you give them that space to breathe and actually maybe, they can learn a lot easier.
So what are the messages ultimately? So you've got a child at home who is either struggling in school, or you don't even know what's going on for them in school, but they're using harmful and aggressive behaviours in the home and you don't really know what's happening. What are the conversation starters we can suggest or help parents think about?
I think one of the first things that you could do is have a conversation with school. That doesn't give you the entire picture, obviously, because how many times have we heard, in school, they're a completely different child. School doesn't see any problem. So, it's not always a way of finding out. But I think it would be a starting place to say, I think they're really struggling. Is there anything you can tell me about what's going on at school? sometimes, I mean, are you suggesting that there was a clue that something was difficult at school, or you were just
Well, I
trying
don't
to
know.
work out?
I was just thinking sometimes for some, it could be that somebody's listening to this saying, well, what do I do? I know that my child doesn't want to go to school. I can't get them up in the morning. I've got school on one hand saying to me, get your child into school.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, we're going to fine you. Or we'll try to be supportive. We're not going to fine you, but you've still got to get your child in school. They've got a reduced timetable.
I think one of the first things to always keep in mind is that you cannot force your child into school. There is nothing.
But then, Matt, you've got a parent where we're saying that, but then you've got a parent where the school is saying you've got to get your child into school or you're going to be fined.
Well, I think I mean, look, it's a real kind of issue because that is the message that school are giving. Get your child in whatever means possible. And often that means is, especially, with primary school age children, it's physically carrying them in, kicking and screaming. Yeah. And it's because the message that school have given is you have to get your child in.
Yeah, bring them in their pajamas. We'll give them breakfast here, kicking and screaming into the school gates. Yeah. It's just...
I mean, that is... Your child is communicating something in really no uncertain terms that there is a massive problem here.
One of the things that I have said to parents is that for me, the most important thing from any child is their mental health and their well-being. Yeah. And sometimes that doesn't mean that they're going to be in school. Yeah. Doesn't make it easy. And I'm not saying it's as simple as just don't let your child go to school, but I'd rather my child's or a child's mental health be taken care of. Yeah. Because the academics can be caught up with and followed up. So it's trying to get the balance right.
Also, as well, if we're thinking about the academics, if that is the reason that they have to get into school, bear in mind a child who's been dragged in. I mean, to use that as an example, but a child who's been dragged in kicking and screaming. Now the chances are, for the first probably few hours of that day, they're in no state to learn anyway. No. You might help them to regulate their emotions and get to a place where potentially they can learn. But I would say almost in a way from a learning perspective, that day's almost a write-off then. Yeah. Because of that experience they've had, traumatic experience they've had to start the day. And I would always suggest that you're better served finding a way to connect on an emotional level with your child first, trying to, again, validation to start with, going, I can see how tough this is for you, and giving a little bit of space. Look, it might be that they get into school, if you take a different tack to begin with, it might be that they get into school half an hour, 45 minutes late. It might be they're really so the amount of times I've heard, oh, do you know what? Just putting their shoes on, they're dragging their heels. They don't want to go, and then the parent will be like, come on, we've got to do this. We've got to get, and the temperature gets ramped up. Yeah, and it's the fact that actually that child might be able to get there, but with a little bit more gentleness. They might, they are mustering their emotional reserves to enable them to face what's going to be what they know, and we don't really understand how difficult it is for our children always.
We've been quite negative about schools, I feel, up till now, and I want to acknowledge that there are good schools out there that really get this and are very supportive and aren't just about silent corridors and aren't just about achieve, but do have a connection with at the emotional level with children and are working hard at a gentle way to get children back into school. And I think it is important that we acknowledge that as well, rather than just having a down on all schools.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's certainly not supposed to be a down on all schools.
Yeah,
I think it's just, and I hear what you're saying. I do think there's some schools that are doing.
But I'm also thinking, I mean, we're talking about helping a child to get in and persuading them gently. But ultimately, if you get in and you're told off for being late, or if as a parent, if you're being threatened with being fined, then there's a lot of other pressures on there, aren't there, that we can't just deal with by saying, oh, well, it doesn't matter if you're half an hour late and you haven't got the right shoes on, or it's a tricky world, isn't it? It's a tricky world.
Well, again, it comes back to look.
Can I bring something else in, which I don't think we've talked about yet? Because we've talked about the way that school can impact and generate, perhaps, maybe that's the wrong word, but can be a driver in the use of harmful behaviour in the home. But also, every time we talk about schools, I'm reminded that one of the first programmes of support in this country came out of an education support officer in the Wirral noticing when she spoke to families that they were talking about difficult behaviour at home. And she started to look at that more, and she created a programme for families, for parents, to enable them to get their children into school and to change the way that the behaviour was happening at home. And so I think that not only we have to think about school sometimes as being the driver, but also as being the perfect opportunity to pick up on stuff. So if a child isn't coming in, we shouldn't be just saying, get your child in or else, but it's an opportunity to say, is there something going on at home that we can help you with?
I think for me, like you say, schools are, I think, looking for support and guidance because they want to get it right for the kids too. They want to get children and young people in schools. They want to give them an education. They do want to work with families. I think it's a bit like all of us sometimes feel a little bit, boxed in and our hands are tied. And what can we do? What can we say? How can we help? So maybe is it about raising awareness around this? Is it more education in school? Is it how do we help support schools? As you say, to use this as how can we positively impact getting children into schools as opposed to it's just bums on seats? And certainly wasn't, for my part, I wasn't trying to suggest it's all about getting bums on seats. It's
no,
about
not at all.
The resources and the capacity. So how can we work together?
I would certainly like to see, as part of a general raising awareness that wherever people work, they should be aware of this issue, whether that's in school or mental health or the police or youth justice or health. We need people to have an awareness of children's harmful behaviour right across the board, don't we? Because then once people know, they can start to be noticing things, and they can. Schools do often have family support services attached to them. Yeah. They can start to be saying, this is going to be an issue, this big secondary school, this is going to be an issue for quite a lot of families. So perhaps we can bring in someone to run a program in school for parents. Or perhaps we can do some work with young people looking at what's going on. But certainly we can be a point of asking and of perhaps referring on if we haven't got a service going on in schools. And I think that's what I would like to see, that I would like to see greater awareness and a more understanding and empathetic response to parents. But we're missing an opportunity at the moment, I think, aren't we? We're missing that opportunity to say, we see something's going on, how can we help?
And I have to say, as an organisation, we have more teachers, more head teachers, more deputy teachers, more liaison staff and pastoral staff coming on our training and supporting the work we're doing because they want to support the families. They're asking us, how can we collectively support this family? What do they need from us? And how can we support their child to get into school, which is really encouraging.
Sadly, we're down to the question of funding, aren't we? And we're getting political again, Jane.
Oh, here we go.
Because schools are saying, we're getting to the end of the year and we've run out of paper. We're not sure if we can afford to pay for this special needs assistant. We're having, we've had to close down the kitchen. So there's the pressures on schools financially are massive. And for us to be asking them, and could you do this as well, is a huge ask, isn't it?
But I wonder though whether it's a matter of, obviously funding comes into it, and because there's going to have to be training involved, but whether it's something about an understanding of what would be the preferred way of responding to certain issues, such as school refusal.
And I think you've nailed it there, Matt, because I don't think sometimes we might be saying, look, you've got a family liaison worker, maybe they could be doing this, but sometimes we're just saying, if we tell you about this and if we tell you how you could respond a bit better, perhaps you could do that. And it won't take longer. It won't take more of your time up. It won't take more of your funding up, and it might even make life easier for you in the long run.
Well, it will, yeah. And because that's something that the teacher, the TA, anyone in the school, it's about understanding where this might be coming from. But again, I think it's about giving, well, then it does come down to funding, because it's about giving staff in school that little bit more headspace to be able to respond instead of just reacting to a problem. The child's not coming. You need to be here, to be able to have that headspace to step back and go, right, why is this happening? And I guess that's where it comes down to funding, because the problem is we keep on piling more and more and more and more on staff in schools, and the pressure on, definitely. I mean, I worked in schools for years, and the pressure on teaching staff, all staff, to be fair, in a school is ludicrous. I mean, the amount of times I've seen someone just in tears in the staff room because it's just all too much for them.
And I think for me, one of the things that is often, it takes one person to show an interest in this for it to kind of, I see this, I've gone on the train, I really like that, or I've heard about this with this young person, and that affects change. And I think what we need to do is get that on a much wider field. We need that one person to be in every school, but, about all communication, because, there's so many things now that impact schools and children's education. It's not just this issue. And I think schools are finding themselves, as we've just alluded to, lack of capacity, lack of funding to have an expert in every, whether it's substance misuse, mental health, domestic violence and abuse, child to parent aggression and harmful. The list goes on. The list just goes on. So how do we find that one teacher in every school that can do this? It's just really challenging.
Do we see there's anything in terms of existing practice in schools that we might want to look at in particular?
We're at a point in where there's very different ideas of how schools should be run, isn't there? And whether about the atmosphere and the ethos of schools. We're very split. There's a very split voices as to what schools should look like, and that will have an impact. And arguably, we would be arguing here for a more emotionally aware, softer, gentler approach in order to both pick up what's going on and to respond to it.
Right. So a softer and more gentle, emotional approach to pick up on what's going on and be able to respond to it better. I know we have spoken about this, but I'm just kind of, as a sort of a neat way of putting it together, I guess, sorry to dumb it down into bullet points and headlines, but I think it's important because I think
it's the learning. It's what are your takeaways, Matt? What are the 3 takeaways, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's. I'm looking at the time. We got to close it up quite soon. But
I think that's a nice way for us to end this podcast on. Though, what are our takeaways from this conversation? I think that could be a nice way to.
Yeah.
So, okay. 3 takeaways.
One of the takeaways is, as always, again, coming down to that validation for each individual child. And also it's about how can we work together with schools to help understand what's happening for you as an individual family. What can the school do to help you and support you, as opposed to feeling like you're at war with the school? So validation, it's 2 takeaways for me: validation and working with schools.
And I'm going to throw a third one in, which is going to be about schools asking questions, being curious. So if and being prepared to ask the question first, not waiting for parents to come in and say help, but actually making that first point of contact as well, and saying, we've noticed there's something wrong, what could we be doing?
I'm gonna agree with that point there. I think it's really important that we kind of make it easy to start that dialogue. and don't come at it from a place of judgment or shame, which I think parents can often sometimes feel like is why so many don't come forward to talk about this, because of the stigma attached to it. So making it easy, making, a gentle approach to saying, right, I can see, it seems like things are quite tough at the moment. How are things going? Making it easy for a parent to actually tell you what's going on. I think for me, I'm not going to give you three, but just the main one that I feel like is that if there is school refusal, there is something going on with the cooperation between the parent and the child, and there is conflict there. And just straight away, that doesn't mean that there's going to be Capa, but there is conflict there, and there is a strain on that relationship, and there is an issue. So it's about gently being inquisitive and to go, right, what is going on at home then? So how are things going at the moment? Because it's about addressing issues and being joined up with it, where we can all work together. Like, I think like we said about being cooperative and collaborative in looking at it. You can't look at any of this stuff in isolation. All needs to work together. It's all connected. It's all systemic.
Indeed.